often think that royal scandals are just a thing of this century, the time that we live in. When we think about it, we think, dare I say, of Harry and Meghan and Edward and Mrs. Simpson. They are the most famous, of course, right now. But royal scandals, let me tell you, are nothing new. And today I thought I'd share with you one that I literally stumbled across while out filming, as I do every day across London. So I thought I'd share it with you. Hi, good morning, Neil Sean here in the heart of London. Thank you for joining me today. Another splendid day here, nice and sunny actually for once. I know it's got a bit dark now, but it was nicer, honestly. This particular area here is in West London. The area we're talking about is just off Bayswater Road, a wonderful area, a very rich area way back at the turn of the 19th century, late 18th century. Lots of houses were built here for the middle classes because it was deemed as a rich area. Of course, just up the road from Kensington Palace, round the corner from Buckingham Palace, so seen as being one of those places that are catchment area, as we like to call them today. Now, this particular story really centres on a lady that caused such a lot of controversy during her period. And more importantly, I think for her, as I say, a lot of people feel that royal scandals are just today. But this lady in particular created scandal, but more importantly, made it work for her, made her wealthy, famous, and dare I say, something of a curiosity. Who are we talking about? The one and only Lily Langtry. And more importantly as ever, what does this area have to do with her and the King, or at the time, the Prince of Wales? She was the daughter of the Dean of Jersey, and in 1874 she married Edward Langtry, who sadly passed away in 1897. However, in 1899 she married Hugo de Bath, who became a baronet in 1907. But it was in 1881 that Mrs. Langtry caused a sensation. Oh yes, indeed, by being the very first society lady to go on the stage. And that was considered scandalous, let me tell you. She made her first notable appearance at the Haymarket Theatre in central London as Kate Hardcastle in She Stoops to Conquer. Now, for some time, the critics really didn't take her seriously. She was beautiful and seen as really, well, just that, not a particularly great actress. But she became a more competent actress later on, and her most successful part being that of Rosalind in As You Like It. Now, as her fame grew, Lily knew exactly how to capitalise on that success, so she took her act out to the provinces in places like Manchester, Leeds, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and of course further down into the beautiful corners of Devon. What's interesting though is she knew exactly what she was doing, because she was a lady that knew the marketability of herself at that particular time. She was also a person who knew where the money truly was. So she bought an old theatre called the Aquarium Theatre in London and turned it into, oh yes, the more regal sounding Imperial Theatre. And this was modelled on a Greek temple and opened under her own direct management in 1901. Now, Lily's basic sort of appeal was her beauty, her stage beauty. But her last appearance on the stage was in 1917. And this was, of course, the emerging period of photography. Someone took a picture, she thought that she didn't look as good as she should, so consequently decided to retire. But she also had other outside interests. That's all thanks to her royal connections, because she owned her own very successful racing stable at Newmarket. She was considered one of the most beautiful women of her time, and she had many distinguished admirers, including her possible most famous, of course, the Prince of Wales, subsequently King Edward VII. So this particular area here really was important in the life of Lily Langtry, because it said that this particular hotel, now what you're seeing at the side of your screen, was in fact a love nest for Edward, then the Prince of Wales, and Miss Langtry. In fact, it is said that he bought the land and built this particular property for her. Now, when you think about it, it does make perfect sense, because, as I say, it's literally round the corner from Kensington Palace and just really around the corner from Buckingham Palace. Now, what's also interesting to note is that The Prince of Wales did like his daily drive out, you know, he liked to be seen, as it were, by the public. Driving around this particular area was wonderful for him because, of course, it was not too far away from his own, shall we say, home. And more importantly, he could slip in, you know, and have a chat and perhaps afternoon tea, catch up on her touring tales, all that sort of stuff. But Lily herself knew the value of Lily Langtry. She was the very first person to capitalise on the idea, in the theatre world at least, to have postcards with her name already inscribed so she could give them out to fans or simply promenading around. Lily Langtry herself, though, knew her value, and more so because she knew exactly how to market herself. She capitalised on the newfound sensation that was photography, early stages nonetheless, but even she knew all about, shall we call it now, Photoshop, to take away blemishes, looking tired, that sort of thing. And she would have these miniature picture cards printed so that if you saw her on the street or promenading out in Hyde Park, she could give you a card. Self-publicity. She was running a busy own theatre, she was starring in plays, she was the person that you wanted to come to your, ball or party or huge event, whether that be an opening night or a day at the races, that sort of thing. Of course, she always played down in private the association with the Prince of Wales. But as I say, it's said that this house was built exclusively for her. Now, the builder and the architect of the time also denied any of this and didn't know the knowledge. But this hotel, as it still stands today, really capitalises on the fact that Mrs. Langtry did stay here, live here, and they even named her suite after her if you want to live in the same room for a short period as she did. What I love about these particular areas of London is that you find all of these sort of nooks and crannies where you see the blue plaques and stuff like that and think, is that possible? Did that person really walk down these streets on a daily basis? As I've said before here on the show, I find it fascinating because we always think that we are the people here right now. But if you could take yourself back 100 and so plus years, when you saw all the ladies with their parasols and the big skirts walking down, the gentlemen with their toppers and canes, all looking really resplendent and, more importantly, dressed beautifully, showing off their wares, as it were, because this was the Instagram of the day, the promenading was the way to be seen. So how did it really fare in the end for Lily Langtry? Because as we now know, he became king. And Queen Victoria herself didn't like to read or hear about any scandal concerning the royal family. Nothing's changed there, yeah? What also, for me, is really pivotal is the fact that Queen Victoria refused to have even her name mentioned in royal circles, although she was totally across everything her children were doing, as we now know. A little bit like our gracious Majesty the Queen today, I'm sure. Now, because of her association with royalty, Lily Langtry really, as I say, capitalised on the markability of Lily Langtry. We talk about branding, don't we, today, and, marketing ourselves, and is it good for the brand and everything like that. She knew all about that before branding had been invented. She became the first society lady to endorse the brand new beauty wonder bar that was Pear's soap. She appeared on ads all across the world and posters on the sides of trolley buses and things like that. It was seen as scandalous. No society lady would be wanted to be exploited in such a way. Not Lily Langtry, though. She knew as her fame grew, she could get more endorsements. When she was on tour around the UK and she stayed at the simply best hotels, whether that be in Harrogate, Bath or London, the management didn't want to charge her because it was Lily Langtry, a friend of royalty. So just the fact that she'd stayed there, slept in a room, that sort of thing, was great for business. This was also the era of capitalisation in the newspapers because scandal was seen as an unsellable factor at that point. But if it had royalty attached, well, that was all right because you weren't insinuating that Mrs. Langtry was anything but a good friend of the Prince of Wales. And it's miraculous when you look at royal diaries just how many events she popped up at, surprisingly, unbeknown to the Prince of Wales, while all members of the royal party were there as well. That was scandal, obviously. But back in those days, they didn't have snappers, everybody with a digital camera, that sort of thing. It wasn't really that you could get caught out. You only knew about it in your inner circle. So the lower people who worked in all of these houses behind me here, as servants, butlers, valets, that sort of thing, They would have known because they would have read the broadsheets, as they were called then, the scandal sheets. But the upper level would speak about it in hushed whispers. So what happened then to Lily? Well, as I say, she was a shrewd businesswoman, and the Cadogan Hotel in Pont Street, again just off Mayfair, a wonderful location that is still seen as very glamorous and desirable today, she managed to sell her house next door to the conversion of that hotel. Now, she was really clever once again, because she sold them the house and kept all of the valuable money from that, which once again alleged wasn't exactly her own money. It was bought for her by a very good friend. So she kept that money, but then said to the hotel, "I'll sell you the house on one condition. I get to live in the hotel and dine and entertain my friends for free." Now, because of her fame, they gave in to this. You see how nothing is new. It's simply the same story over and over again. Now, as we know, in this world of modern era, everybody seemingly is looking for royal scandal, but it's always been there, it's just in a different form. And nowadays, of course, there's so many ways of documenting that particular scandal. But for now, it does appear that Lily Langtry remains forever associated with our wonderful British monarchy, but unlike so many, hasn't sullied their or her reputation. Neil Sean in the heart of London.